Thank you, everyone, for joining us on Gabbing About Gardening. Gabbing About Gardening is a weekly Zoom gathering for gardeners. We are based on the gift economy, and that means that what we are sharing and giving today is free of charge. We do pay an honorarium to our guest teachers because they are professionals and they need our support as well. And we try to get the highest caliber people to share with us all aspects of gardening. And that's why we call it Gabbing About Gardening. We keep it pretty casual. We also have a weekly radio show now on Cortez Island Radio, and you can pick that up on our YouTube channel. Also, today's recording will be posted on our Gabbing About Gardening YouTube channel. And so if you have to leave early or if you want to share this phenomenal information we're going to be getting today with some of your friends, that will be available on our YouTube channel. And we will be posting it on our Gabbing About Gardening Facebook page. So thank you again for joining us. I'll be posting in the chat box where you can contribute if you'd like to donate to Gabbing About Gardening. Your donations go not only to pay an honorarium to our guest teachers, but also to help fund some of the permaculture and organic gardening education programs that Gabbing About Gardening is helping to fund and helping to establish on our islands. And Arzeena will be telling us about some of her favorite organizations as well. But first, I'm going to tell you about Arzeena because you may think that you know Arzeena, but you don't know the half of it. So I'm going to take the time to share with you something that I've learned about Arzeena in the last few years that I've had the honor of knowing this phenomenal woman. And that is that Arzeena is truly a Renaissance woman. She is a teacher, a farmer, an agronomist, a food security activist. And I'm going to interrupt myself here quickly because I keep admitting people into the room, which is lovely. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm just letting everyone know a little bit about Arzeena, who she is and the amazing things that she's doing. She's a politician, and of course, she's a mom too, with two beautiful daughters. And as one of BC's most popular garden club speakers and sought after on CBC radio, columns, information in the media, Arzeena discourses on a wide range of useful organic gardening and food security topics. Education-wise, Arzeena earned her bachelor's degree in crop science from the University of Guelph and her master's degree in sustainable agriculture from the University of London, England. She worked abroad for many years as a QSO volunteer in Thailand and as a researcher in Jamaica, India, and Bangladesh, where she encouraged sustainable and integrated agriculture, composting, and natural alternatives to pesticide use. Arzeena became staff agrologist for West Coast Seeds in the late 90s and then ran her own seed company, Terra Viva Organics. And from 2008 to 2012, Arzeena was the coordinator of the Richmond Food Security Society, where she oversaw a number of community projects, which included a proposal to the city of Richmond to declare itself a GMO-free zone. She's a local heroine, a food security educator and activist. In 2015, Arzeena became a founding member of Merville Organic Growers Cooperative, which is a marketing cooperative based in the Comox Valley. Merville Organics operates a 120-share community-supported agriculture, known as CSA program, and sells through 3 farmers markets. She continues to share her passion for agriculture with local community groups such as the Comox Valley Growers and Seed Savers and the Fertile Ground Project. She also teaches soil science at North Island College and is founder and chair of the Mid-Island Farmers Institute. Recently, Arzeena became a director of the Investment Agriculture Foundation of BC, which is an industry-led, not-for-profit organization working to foster growth and innovation across BC's agri-food industry. Her family farm, Amara Farm, specializes in growing winter salads. And we know today Arzeena is going to help us to plan and know how to plant our winter gardens. Arzeena loves to introduce people to growing their own winter greens, such as Claytonia, Tatsoi, Mizuna. She has been growing winter vegetables for over 15 years and is dedicated to helping people start their own winter gardens as part of their permaculture garden design. In 2018, Arzeena won the election to become, Area B Regional Director in Comox, British Columbia. She is dedicated to helping young people grow their own local business, among many other local initiatives. And recently, I just learned today, Arzeena has become co-chair for Farmers for Climate Solutions, a Canadian national organization that takes climate change very seriously. Welcome, Arzeena, and I think nothing could be more timely this morning on CBC Radio. I heard an interview that was a discussion about the concern from farmers about the drought that's happening in many parts of Canada and what it means to our food supply. So there you go, my dear. There's your launch pad. Thank you for joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Lou. And yes, such a fantastic segue because, and I was going to ask folks on the call too, like, what reason do you have for growing food through the fall and winter? And food security is one of them for me, definitely. As we are noticing the price of produce go up, especially through the winter months, and we are so reliant on imports through the winter months. Growing your own food, especially greens, is just one way of reducing your cost of your family's food bill, but also B, ensuring that you've got some really healthy product and produce that you'll soon find out is actually a lot easier to grow through the fall and winter months than it is often in the spring. So thank you for hosting, Lou, and thank you everybody for coming out of your garden and joining us, because I know, at least for us here on the Comox Valley and areas around, we've just been going through a week or more of January where it's been it's been really low temperatures. Heating kicked on in my house. I don't know about your guys, but it was chilly. And so our summer crops haven't even yet kicked in, and already we're talking about winter. So I know it's hard on the heart for many of you to think about so much in the future, but I'm hoping that this talk inspires you to just go that extra effort to making sure that your garden is productive for 12 months of the year. I promise you, come November, you will thank me for pushing you to do some more planting. I'm going to preface this by saying my experience has been from the West Coast, from Richmond earlier on, and now the Comox Valley. If you are living north of here or in areas that are colder, you'll have to adjust some of the things that I talk about. Even I had to adjust from moving from Richmond to here. We're about 3 weeks behind in the season in the Comox Valley versus the mainland. And on my property, I was just discussing this with Lou, I can't overwinter kale outside. We have freeze thaw cycles that are so deep that it causes the tops of the kales to begin to rot and fall over. And so I've had to, on my own farm, figure out better ways of doing my overwintering. So we'll discuss that. Much of what we'll talk about today, you'll just be experimenting a bit more, because in your, your own microclimate, things might be slightly different. I'm going to just share a couple of resources, and hopefully you can see this when I put it closer. This is called 4-Season Harvest. It's by a gentleman named Elliot Coleman, who is one of the gardening gurus and farming gurus in North America. This is probably the book that first inspired me to do winter gardening. Elliot spent much time in France and in Europe, and just noticed how much they were producing through the winter months. Now, he lives in Maine, or Vermont, anyways, east coast of the US, where his winters are way colder than what we have, but they're bright, they're sunny. And so many of the techniques that he can use, if it makes sense, even though we've got a milder climate here, don't often work here, or they have to be slightly adjusted, dates especially. So grab this book if you can. His prose is always amazing. But I just want to encourage you to think that we do have a few slightly differences. And we do have some great resources to help those folks on the coast where our winters are more overcast, where we don't have that bright sun usually, which would heat up a lot of cold frames and greenhouses. It's more dull here. So we have to adjust the way that we grow food in the wintertime. This is another resource, Year-Round Harvest by Dr. Linda Gilkison. And you may know Dr. Gilkison from a lot of her natural pest control work and advice that she gives around that. But she has some fabulous tips on how to grow food, again, based on the West Coast. She's from Salt Spring Island, which I still consider tropical compared to where I am. But again, if you sign up for her on her website, she has an email list that she sends out monthly or bi-monthly emails to remind people of what they should be starting right now. So highly recommend you getting on that list. And then lastly, can't talk about winter production without mentioning West Coast Seeds, where I also honed a lot of my knowledge on growing food through the winter months. If you get the West Coast Seeds catalog, either online or a hard copy, usually around page 6, they have a calendar that lists on per month what you should be seeding. And this is a great visual reminder of all the things that you can be either putting in the ground or starting indoors in trays and then transplanting. So I have one of these laminated in our hoop house where we do our seed starting, just as a reminder, because sometimes, you forget all of the things that you can grow. I'm going to just share my screen so that I have a presentation on winter vegetables. But before we start that, is there any questions so far? Has I brought up anything that you're like, oh, I'm still not sure. What is this whole winter gardening thing? Yes, post your questions in the chat, or feel free to unmute yourself and just ask away. I prefer to be interrupted while I'm talking rather than waiting at the end where it might not fit into what's talking about later. So I'm just going to pause in case anyone has questions now. If there is something in particular you want to learn how to grow, put that in the chat as well so that I can remember to refer to it during the talk. Okay. Timing of purple sprouting broccoli. I know it drives me nuts too. Okay, that and Brussels sprouts, the two drive me crazy, but for sure I will talk about purple sprouting broccoli. And if you've never heard about purple sprouting broccoli, don't worry, I have photos. It is actually purple and it is a sprouting broccoli. So This is a photo of my farm come summertime. You know, the patch in front of what you are seeing is all the winter squash, but I have these beautiful greenhouses that came with the farm. And these were one of the reasons that we purchased this farm, is they were already here. This is what those 3 greenhouses are really what enable us to grow food 12 months of the year. Putting a layer of plastic over your plants transports whatever is growing under that plastic 300 miles south. So wherever you're growing, whatever latitude, one layer of plastic moves that farm or that piece of whatever's underneath 300 miles south of here. So somewhere in sort of lower Washington state-ish is where my undercover veggies are in my farm. And so if you can think of your farm that way, or your garden, there's easy ways for you to do what's called season extension, using protected agriculture. So a cover with plastic, a cover with glass, whatever you have. This is really part of the key of enabling you to grow fresh things year round. Okay, let's get started. So just an idea to show you, these are some photos from the farmer's market from our stand of the things that we can grow through the fall and winter months. I think pretty much kale and chard, everybody knows. Frise, I don't know if everyone is familiar with the Radicchio endive family. This is another family that I love growing, partly because it's not a brassica, it's not a kale or collard or, you know, in that giant family. This is a different family altogether, different pests and diseases. So it's lovely to have differences so you can practice rotation on your garden or in your farm. Lettuce. I mean, in the fall, lettuce is so spectacular and delicious and juicy and not bitter. So we often take a break in growing lettuce come July and August. Too hot for lettuce, it becomes bitter so quickly and it bolts. We might grow baby salad greens, just allowing the salad to grow very small, cut, and then that's it. But if you want heads of lettuce, again, fall is when, you know, is another good time. I hope you're all enjoying some really good lettuce right now, though, because it's been really great lettuce weather lately with all of the rain. Now, I do want to warn you, though, we do live in a region where we can get a lot of water. And nothing, although we don't get temperatures generally that will kill plants, standing water will. And, you know, this is a photo of my garlic patch a couple of years ago. And thankfully, knowing that we do get this water pooling on our farm, we raise our beds or we mound them. You know, I don't have formal raised beds with wood sides, but just mounding the soil enables the roots of your plants to be out of water. And that's usually what enables them to continue to growing, and it doesn't kill them. Standing water, sadly, will kill a lot of your overwintering plants. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about where in your garden you're going to be growing. If there is a spot that tends to have water pooling in the winter time, either don't grow winter crops there or somehow mound your soil, raise a bed so that your plants are not sitting in the water. So siting is going to be really important for you when you're choosing where to grow in the winter time. So just a couple of points of why even grow a winter garden. If you have garden space, usually it's empty in the winter time. And if you don't put something in it, Mother Nature generally does. They're what we call weeds, quote unquote weeds. So planting things that you want is one way to sort of prevent a lot of the weed growth that happens. Our climate is very conducive to gardening. As much as we like to complain about our winter weather, it is nothing compared to what they have to go through out east or in the interior. So we should really take full advantage of it, especially on that topic that Lou mentioned of food security and our supply chains, you know, getting more and more fragile from wherever that food is coming in from. I want to talk about pests because right now, I have slugs, I have aphids, I have flea beetles, I have winter cat or cabbage moth. I know there's around a cabbage rootworm. There's a lot of pests in the springtime that we tend to get hit with. And I find growing veggies in the fall, especially when you start your plants and have them growing in the late summer months going into the fall, you get so many fewer pests. The flea beetles are pretty much gone. The slugs haven't really started coming out again. So just keep that in mind, that there are fewer. It is really a lot easier growing many of these things. Money is always a great incentive. Winter salads, especially things like arugula, so easy to grow in the fall and into the early winter, and so expensive in the stores. Now, as I was mentioning, your garden could look like this through the winter time, or it could look like this. The more you fill it with crops and plants that you want, you see there's fewer places for those weeds to sneak in, and then there's less work for you to do in the springtime. So fill it as much as possible with the plants that you really enjoy. I'm going to pause and just double check if there's any questions in the chat. Let me know. I see a bunch of points. Getting beets to grow. What do I do for slugs? Okay. Okay, some great questions. I'm just going to answer one of them for now, and I think the rest are going to come later. With all vegetables, here's the thing that we have on our farm, where it's possible to start plants indoors, or at least in flats, we do that. We just find there's better germination. Your plants grow to a size that they can withstand some attack by slugs or other pests that can be in the garden. You just get better control. So in the growing for fall and winter, we try and as much as possible to start our plants in flats. Partly because too, the garden space is being taken up with other things that are currently growing right now. So instead of having to sacrifice that garden space, pull out something early, starting in flats gives you at least a month of time to allow whatever's there to finish, and then you can replace it with something that's already been started. Now,
Arzeena, could you just clarify what question you're actually answering right now? I'm not sure I know.
This was the last. It said, any tips on what's direct seeded, transplanted, or are they all transplanted?
Okay, somebody's muted. Okay. Okay, let me just, is this any tips on when to start everything? Is that what you're saying? Or which can be direct seeded and
yes, what can be direct seeded and what can be transplant. So wherever possible, transplant. Having said that, root vegetables, primarily you direct seed. Just because carrots, elbow beets can be transplanted. You know what? There's just so many, like you want to grow a fair number. I direct seed those wherever possible. There's just too many for us to transplant, and carrots really shouldn't be transplanted. Their roots, when you wiggle them around through transplanting, it tends to deform them. So root vegetables should be direct seeded. Wherever possible, everything else should be transplanted.
Great. And Yvonne is asking what you mean by the word flats, and do you recommend plastic or coir?
Yes. Sorry, I don't have one to show you, but a flat is a plastic tray, and that's kind of the technical term, flats. They're 10 inches by 20 inches. They're the standard tray that you would see in a garden center. They are plastic. It is one of the few things that, well, we do use plastic on the farm, primarily because it holds water so well. I find coir and peat pots lose their moisture so quickly. And that's going to be a really big issue starting seeds for fall and winter, because you're starting them in the summer months when it's even warmer. and keeping them moist continuously is going to be tough. So we do use plastic to hold many of these plants. So yeah, good question. Should I answer another one before we go ahead?
Well, you seem to have an idea of which ones are fitting in with your plan. So I'll follow your lead, my dear.
Sure. The only other question I'll answer right now, because we're currently going through this, is the slug apocalypse that I was just mentioning prior to the Zoom starting. It's heavy slug season right now. I know gardeners are super great at figuring out strategies for controlling slugs. We have resorted to on our farm using the Safer's slug and snail bait, or the sluggo, which is the common term. It's an organic bait that you can purchase from the garden center. We just find it the most effective and the least amount of work, but you can use beer baits, you can use crushed eggshells. Those two have to be replenished when it rains. But like traps and kind of barriers are generally the method that most gardeners use. But for us, the Safer's bait seems to work the best. So that's what we use. Yeah. So now I just want to, when we talked about like where in your garden you may want to situate a winter garden. Like definitely not where you have pooling water, what we mentioned before. The other thing to keep in mind is to try and find the sunniest spot of your garden, remembering that the winter sun is much lower in the sky. So if you have trees around you, especially in the south side, that may block the sun, in the summer months, the sun might be above them, but in the winter months, it might be lower. And so that might adjust where in your garden you're going to situate your garden bed, your winter veg. You're also going to want to select cold tolerant plants. Sadly, we're not going to talk about how to extend your tomato and pepper and melon production. Even though that can happen, it's a lot of energy, and even the commercial greenhouse folks don't do that. They move their production to Mexico. What I think is far more efficient use of your time and energy is to grow those crops that don't mind it when it's overcast and cool. So there's a lot of Asian greens, pretty much everything that you started in the spring months, spinach and peas, salad mixes. Those are the types of plants that can grow for fall and winter and are really comfortable in that low light, cooler temperatures. Certain things that have, how should I say this? A lot of leafy plants can be harvested when they're baby greens. So their days to maturity don't really come into effect. There are some crops though, like peas, that have different maturities. Some are 50 days, some are 80 or 90 days. If you're going to grow peas, in which you can for the fall, you want to select those that are maturing within 60 days. So you do get pods before we get a hard frost. And that generally means that shelling peas are out of the question, but that some snaps, but definitely snow peas can be grown for fall and winter. So check on the days to maturity. They're usually on the packet that you're given to ensure that you're going to get a good crop in the fall. What we want to see basically is that by mid-October, your plant is the full size that it's supposed to be. Mid-October is this magical time, what we call the Persephone period, if you remember your Greek mythology. When Persephone goes into the underworld, the planet goes into that darkness and the time when everything's in hibernation. And for us at this latitude, it's around October 13th to the 15th. It's a really interesting thing what happens. Our day length shrinks and our temperatures are low, that most things growing outside don't put on any more new growth. They are just the size that they are in the garden is the size that they will be for the next few months. They're not going to grow anymore. So what happens though is if you've got a cabbage, if it's not full size by mid-October, it won't form a head until the following spring. So timing is really important for when, when you want to be able to eat, because as long as that head is there for the cabbage by mid-October, it can stay in the garden through October, November, December. You just harvest it whenever you want. But if it hasn't formed a head by mid-October, it's not going to form one until February-ish the next year. So mid-October is just try and keep that time in your head, because you're going to now work backwards from mid-October so that we can discuss when to start your plants. So, and we're going to go into this in a lot of detail, so don't worry too much. So yes, this Persephone period runs from October to mid-February. The light levels are so low that the plants are not putting on new growth. I have found some exceptions to this, especially if you can grow them under cover, under some kind of plastic. Asian greens, bok choys, baby bok choys, Mizuna, like the tatsoys, Claytonia, which is native to here, and the Russian kales, the flat leaf kales, seem to be able to continue to put on some new growth even through the Persephone period. They're magical. I don't know what it is, but they can produce new leaves slowly, not very quickly, but they can. So there are some exceptions to the rule, but by and large, that tends to be undercover, not outside, and it is limited to certain types of veggies. Okay, I mentioned that term protected culture, and I just want to make sure everybody understands what that means. It means either using a remay or floating row cover, which gives you about 2 degrees of frost protection underneath. It will enable whatever's growing underneath to grow maybe an extra 2 to 3 weeks into the fall or winter months. It can be something like a cloche, which is the fancy French term for kind of any kind of cover you put over your plant that's clear, allows light to come through and traps that heat. Usually they were made of glass, but a 4-liter milk jug with the bottom cut out is a fantastic cloche and works just as well, as does, and this is a gardener told me this trick, if you know anyone who has the water delivery, the big giant water containers, when they crack, they're no longer really able to be used. You can cut the bottoms out of those, and those also make fantastic cloches. They're mini greenhouses. Cold frames is another method of growing in protected culture, and low tunnels. I've got photos of these, so I'll explain them with the photos. And then we have what are called high tunnels, and that's what I have on my farm. Those larger greenhouses that you can walk through. They're generally not heated, but they are tall enough so that you can walk through them. So here's what floating row cover looks like if you've never seen it. We put it over our salad greens. We often use it as an insect protection right now for cabbage fly and for carrot rust fly. It's fantastic. But it does trap some warmth in underneath. So that's just something to be aware. And this is what a cold frame looks like. It's usually a clear glass or Perspex top to it. It allows you to, trap even more heat than remay. And one thing to keep in mind is on a sunny day, it can cook inside of those cold frames. So they do need to be able to vent. So usually you just lift up the lid and put a stick to allow the warm air to escape. They generally have no bottom to them, so they're portable. You can move them around the garden, and there's lots of great plans on the internet that will enable you to, figure out how to grow them, or how to build them using often recycled glass panels, or whatever you can get your hands on. And then we have high tunnels. And this is what I was mentioning, being able to walk through. These are kind of like the Cadillacs of season extension. They really do allow you to do a lot of year-round harvesting in volume. You can do year-round harvesting in cold frames, not a problem. But if you like eating a lot of salad, just something to keep in mind. If you have the space to put up a tunnel, they're great. Way more room to grow. And one thing to keep in mind is that the length of the long side of the tunnel should face south, so that it's east-west oriented. That the long side is the side that you want the sun to be hitting, because that's going to have the most surface area capturing the sun's rays. These can be made portable. It's a little bit more complicated, but just for those of you who have acreage, this is potentially something to think about. And often they're vented, because when it does get sunny, they get smoking hot in there. They're usually vented by the sides rolling up. And so those need to be in place. Okay, now we're going to go into what to plant. But before we do that, were there any questions around, I'm sorry, I'm just going to check the chat now, around the infrastructure that you need? In the high tunnel, what do you have in there in the summer? So in the summer months, we have cucumbers, cherry tomato. We mostly grow cherry tomatoes. I've got sweet potatoes this year and ginger. Things that really, really like hot is what grows in the high tunnels in the summer months. Eggplants, pepper, basil. Yeah, those love to grow in the summer months. What can grow uncovered? So outside, uncovered is where you can put things like winter cabbage. What else is really cold hardy? At our place, not a lot. I mean, if you're in a slightly warmer place, the kales can grow uncovered. If you like growing kohlrabi, that generally can be grown uncovered. Spinach is actually extremely cold hardy, and it can grow uncovered outside as well. So that's another potential. My carrots volunteered last year. They're almost full size. Oh, good. Yay. We actually planted carrots in our high tunnel in March. We had some empty beds that we'd already pulled out some of our early season veggies, and we're harvesting carrots now as well. So that's another way that you can use your season extension. You don't often think of carrots like that. Can corn salad grow through the winter? Absolutely. It's one of those things that prefers to be germinated in cool soils. So you generally start it in September, and then it goes through the winter months. And I'm talking about corn salad. There'll be photos. So sorry, I'm just going through these really quickly.
There is also a question about the slug bait, Arzeena.
Mm-hmm.
And what is it that constitutes it organic? Midge is expressing some question and concern about if it's able to kill slugs. Is it not harmful for the environment?
Yeah, great question. Yes, and it should be something that you should be concerned about, because the old slug baits, the metaldehyde slug baits, were extremely toxic and really dangerous for pets and for birds that eventually ate those slugs. It poisoned everything. But the current new forms of slug bait are using iron phosphate. So they're using iron and phosphorus are both nutrients for mammals, for birds, nutrients for the soil, actually. But when slugs and snails ingest them, it stops their feeding. So they stop being able to ingest any more food. They kind of crawl off into the long grass and die. And if a bird or something else ingests that slug, it doesn't affect them. If the pellets, I mean, they're little pasta pellets you sprinkle, and if something else eats that pellet, it's generally not a problem. So it's great that this was found out. It was actually developed in Victoria. A scientist figured this out, and now it's used quite extensively by organic farmers. So yeah, I've just found it really, I have a plethora of birds at my place, and I have dogs. So it was always something I was worried about, and we haven't found an issue with either of them.
And it hasn't changed the mineral composition of the soil in any way?
No, not really. In fact, especially on Vancouver Island and the Gulf Islands, iron and phosphorus are two things our soils are so low in. So if anything, it's an expensive way to fertilize. I don't recommend it, but if anything, it's going to help our problem. So,
okay. Well,
yes.
I've never tried slug bait. I've heard you talk about it before. So it's definitely on my list
Yes.
to get. Now, you're probably going to talk about this later, but Leslie wanted to hear about growing beets. She's having a problem with that.
Okay.
And Sheila wants to hear about cabbages and cauliflower.
Okay.
But
all right.
In your good time.
Awesome. Awesome. Okay. I'm just moving around a few of the things and closing the chat. Okay. We'll go into specifics around the different crops now. And then as they come up, if something's not clear or if I missed a point about the crop, just let me know. That's probably the easiest. So we're here in sort of mid to early June, and I have Brussels sprouts out here, but I do want to let you know, like for the most part, the recommendations about timing, I'm going to make around starting from seed, so that gives you the most flexibility. It's the least costly for home gardeners. And if you miss the timing, what I'm telling you here, you have 4 to 5 weeks to find seedlings. So, don't worry too much if, oh, I missed the Brussels sprout time. You will find some seedlings out there. And so that gives you a little bit more of a comfort, a buffer. Having said that, if you start Brussels sprouts now, at this time, mid-June, you won't be eating Brussels sprouts at Thanksgiving. You may be eating them at Christmas, but probably you'll be eating them in springtime next year. The May started Brussels sprouts are usually the time for Thanksgiving. So if that's when you really want to have Brussels sprouts, grab some seedlings, see if you can find them. Most of the garden centers do, as do farmers markets. So keep that in mind. This is now the time to start from seed your winter cabbages, such as January King, Danish ballhead, or anything that's over 120 days. If you can imagine, there are vegetables that take, half a year to mature, like these crops. January King is such an amazing cabbage, though. So worth it if you can grow it. It's stunning with its pink and greens. And generally, you won't find seedlings for it. This is something you will want to get from seed. So this is now where you go back to the garden centers and grab some packets if you haven't gotten them already. And I think people were asking about growing them. So, for the Brussels sprouts and the winter cabbage, and especially, I would start these inside my house. Seedlings in trays, those 10-20 trays, or in 4-inch pots. If you only want to do a few of them, very similar to the way you started in springtime. Whatever system you had in terms of equipment, use that. The only thing you don't need is the lights. So yay, it's another reason to grow for fall. Because as soon as they're up, you can put them outside. It's warm. Like, we don't have to worry about frost and all of that stuff that you had to worry about in the spring months. You can move them outside. The only caveat, though, for these 3 especially, put some remay over them, because as young seedlings, they are extremely susceptible to that white butterfly that's currently laying its eggs on everything, the imported cabbage moth. So start them inside, you'll get better germination, put them outside once they're up, and then you can continue to monitor them. We generally transplant, we wait till the seedlings are about 4 or 5 weeks before we transplant them in the garden. Or pot them up. If you don't have space in your garden just yet to put these in, you can buy yourself some time by potting them up into bigger pots, okay? So that there's a cutoff though, and we're kind of at, we're June 14th, we're coming into no longer early, so just be aware. The second half of June is when you want to plant, here's that purple sprouting broccoli. I know it sounds insane. You're going to be planting this purple sprouting broccoli and you're not going to be eating until next March, but it's worth it. Does anyone on the call grow purple sprouting broccoli? Or have you ever eaten purple sprouting broccoli? I see Lou's hand up. How do you enjoy, like, what do you think? Oh, you're just.
I like it. I didn't find it that hard to grow. And I did purple cauliflower last year too.
Nice, nice. And Anne, I see your hand up. I don't know if that was just yeah, I've done it before, or if you wanted to ask something.
No, sorry, I was just figuring out how to unmute myself. No, I love it. It's one of my favorite vegetables. Yeah, it's just wonderful. It's a real treat, March through May.
Yeah, so good. Like, you know, there's very little non-leafy thing that you can grow that early in the spring, in March. And having broccoli, something you can crunch on, so good.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Lynn, did you have a comment as well?
Yes, I think I was just wondering if my problem is I buy transplants of purple sprouting broccoli, and I wonder if some of the nurseries don't have the right type. Could that be?
Well, there are a few types to them. You know, Jen, maybe I'll ask, what happens to your purple sprouting broccoli that it sounded like you had some problems with it?
Yeah, I've been trying it because I'm, you know, like newish here. And I found 1 year they all formed little heads in the fall. The next year I didn't get anything. One time they all went to seed really quickly.
Oh. Yeah, okay. Well, here's where, yes, I think it could be whatever's happening in the nursery. Broccoli is a bit of a fiddly plant, right? If it gets stressed in its pot that it's growing in, it's going to want to go to seed way earlier than it should. Whereas if you are controlling it, you know, you're starting the seed, you're potting it up, that's in ensuring that it has the nutrients as it's growing along, less likely for it to go into sort of that shock and try and produce broccolets prematurely. Yeah, there aren't many purple sprouting broccolis that should form before the fall. So that's probably what was happening. Something to keep in mind with all of these, with the Brussels sprouts, cabbage, and the purple sprouting broccoli, they are all heavy, heavy feeders. You want to be putting a cup of either manure or a organic 444 in the transplant hole when you're transplanting. Probably the most heavy feeders you can grow as a vegetable are these three types. They're in the ground so long. Yeah, they're just heavy feeders. The other thing is that they need space. I haven't seen a cabbage that grows less than 3 square feet in itself, like one cabbage. Same thing with the purple sprouting broccoli. The bigger the plant that you grow through the fall, the more purple sprouting florets you'll have in the springtime. So the more you can boost the plant through the fall months, the better production you'll have in the spring. Did that answer your question, Lynn?
Yes, thank you. That makes sense. Thank you very much.
Great. And as Lou mentioned, this is also a time for overwintering cauliflower. So if you've not heard of overwintering cauliflower, and you know it's still a bit unusual, it is, yes, it's a cauliflower. You actually get a head of cauliflower in the spring, and it's beautiful. It's either white, but you can get purple or you can get orange. They're really fantastic. And again, not a leafy green that you're eating sometime in around April, which is super exciting. The other thing is you can also do cabbages that are not the January Kings. They're the 90 to 100 day cabbages. Those can be started at the second half of June. So you can see there's already a discrepancy between early June and late June. You could, if you miss the winter, like the January King, Danish ballhead, there are other varieties that are shorter and you can grow them at the end of June, but still have to be probably started from seed. And I've got photos just so that I promise this is actually what we're talking about. The purple sprouting broccoli is on the left. It's a variety called Red Arrow. And on the right is a cauliflower called Galleon. You can also grow purple cape And maybe folks, if you want to write in the chat, if you've had success with other varieties, feel free to type them in the chat for that. So that's generally what we're going to be doing in June. I know we're already talking about winter veg, but it's just a thing that yeah, we're going to deal with. So you put these seedlings outside when they grow to height, and when do they get covered? So the steps are: start your seeds in a 4-inch pot or in a flat inside where you can manage the moisture. Soon as you see the seed leaves come up, move the tray outside, cover in remay so that the cabbage moth doesn't get to them. I usually start potting up into the next side when I see a true leaf. When you see the true leaf, each seedling gets its own 4-inch pot. And they can grow in that 4-inch pot for another 4 to 5 weeks. By that time, the food is run out in that pot, that it's time for them to either be transplanted in the ground or potted up into a 1 gallon. So that's kind of the procession that's happening. The 1 gallon gives you another month of time before you need to be, but eventually after that, you're going to have to be putting it in the ground. These are crops that do need really, I don't recommend growing them in pots. They're such heavy feeders, unless you don't mind, feeding them with a liquid feed every couple of weeks. Then you could grow them in a pot, but I recommend growing them in the ground. So yeah. Is the culture for green sprouting broccoli the same as purple? Absolutely, it is. I just prefer purple because there's not a lot of purple things in the garden in the wintertime. And color, I find, is just so fun. So, but if you've got green sprouting broccoli, use that for sure. Okay, we're now switching into July, and just want to remind people that if this is getting overwhelming, all of this is summarized in the West Coast Seeds calendar. Like, this is all here. So you can download it as a PDF from the West Coast Seeds website, or you can order one of those little planting calendars from their catalog.
And I'll remind everyone as well, Arzeena, that it's being recorded and they can watch it and listen to it out in the garden.
Yes, absolutely. So that, as you're starting your seeds, you can hear this like, oh yeah, and grab that packet. And yes, okay. So we're moving into July now. So again, this is going to give you a little bit of extra time to prepare. July is the month when you want to be starting seed of kale. And I recommend, again, those red Russian or Siberian kales. The flat leaf kales are the ones that tend to grow and continue to put on growth through the fall and winter months. They're really way more delicious, I find, than the curly kales, but that's my opinion. Swiss chard, so a non-brassica, super exciting. I recommend growing bright lights if you can. Again, color in the garden, so great. Beets. So this is any kind of beet, really. They all do really well. It's early July. And what I mean by early July, when everybody is celebrating Canada Day, or it's my husband's birthday, July 1, this is when you're thinking it's root vegetable time, because not only is it the cutoff for beets, but also for baby potatoes and for carrots, for turnips as well. I forgot to put turnips on this list, but it is the week that your root vegetables want to be seeded for fall and winter. Okay, you could maybe like push it to the 10th of July, but really early July is the last week you can seed your root vegetables and have them come to full size by mid-October. And then it'll be up to you of how you want to go from there. On our farm, we have too much wireworm and we have flooding and freeze thaw that really impacts our carrots, that we can't leave the carrots in the ground. We pull them all up and store them in a cold cellar through the winter months. But if you don't have those issues, if you can mulch heavily and prevent that freeze thaw, keeping the carrots in the ground is so much better. Baby potatoes, I mean like the nugget potatoes. You can plant nugget, warba or chieftain, the ones that form the smaller potatoes, and are because you'll be eating those around September time. Green beans. You can seed green beans in early July and have them for eating at the end of September. And then Walla onions. Here is something now that we haven't discussed before, but the Walla onions are a type of sweet onion that is our North American translation or our version of the sweet Spanish onion. They are like a low sulfur onion that's really beautiful and lovely to eat. They're ready now because for folks who planted back in July. They can be seeded in the spring, I should mention, but when you plant them in July, they get enormous and they're ready right now. Again, having onions ready in June, just not possible seeding in the same year. This is why you want to be doing it. And I'm going to show you photos of all of these. So, and sorry, I mentioned those snow peas. This is, or any pea that's less than 60 days is seeded in early July. Oh, radicchio. Sorry. Are there any radicchio Andi family friends on the list? Like, this is the time when radicchio is started for lovely, crunchy heads of radicchio in the fall. There is a huge radicchio renaissance in the US happening right now. It's really interesting to see how popular it's become. It's a bitter Italian green. I really enjoy it. Not everybody does because of the bitterness. I like bitter things through the winter months, but it does need to be started in early July. So I'm just going to go through some of the photos because to explain, Siberian kale is one of my favorite kales. When you start it in July, when it starts to come up, the leaves are going to look like this. They're buttery soft. They have a very small midrib and they don't have that tight curl. So it's not ideal for kale chips, but for wraps and sauteing, I mean, it's so delicious. And then when it goes through a winter and starts to regrow in the spring months, the new leaf growth turns curly. It's got this crazy morphology of going from flat leaf to curly. Delish, so, so good. It's actually a turnip. It's in the turnip family. So the flavor, a lot of people prefer the flavor of the Siberian kale over regular kale. It's slightly sweeter, less bitter. So just a tip there. Here are those Walla onions. These are those giant globe white onions that, again, if you want them early in the season, they have to be started this year. Otherwise, if you start them in March, which you can, you will not get them till sort of late July, early August. So that's the trade-off. They are a 200-day onion. They're very sweet. And like I said, they're harvested in June when you don't get onions otherwise in June. Okay, I'm speeding through it because I'm just noticing time. We've already kind of gone through quite a lot, an hour, but I'm just gonna double check the chat because I think I did see a bunch of questions come up and I don't wanna be missing those.
Well, one question has to do with a squirrel who's eating, I forget who it was. Oh, Kitty. Kitty says she has a gray squirrel who devoured her mature tall kale and kaleettes over the winter. Do you have any suggestions for that, Arzeena?
Are you sure it was squirrel? Because we have had a really bad outbreak of rats this winter. Regardless, a rodent is eating your kale, which is so, so sad. The only thing that I can think of is to create some metal fencing around your plant. If you can get the metal mesh, like the mesh, and bury it down and kind of create a tube around your plant.
That has a top on it as well?
Well, I mean, I guess the squirrel can climb, right? I guess it's going to have a top too. So yeah. Unfortunately. That's a tough one. If anybody else has any tips on what to do for a grown kale being eaten by a rodent, yes.
Carol Hasselfeld is making a comment here, Arzeena, about onions. She said that she found the Wallas didn't store very well. She harvested them in August and early September, and they went mushy by late fall and early winter. Wants to know, is that typical?
It is. And sorry, I should warn you. So thank you for bringing that up. Walla Wallas are not storage onions. They basically can be eaten like an apple. That's how juicy they are. And when you have an onion that's wet and that's sweet, it does not have good storing properties. So this is the type of onion you're going to want to eat fairly soon, like within a month. So that, and you're enjoying them on fresh salads, eating them primarily raw. But if for storage, you do not want to grow the Walla Walla. You're going to grow copra or one of the other yellow onions instead. If you want to have a keeping onion. Yeah.
That's really good to remember.
Yeah.
And Judy McKinley is wanting to know a little more about should I cut or not cut the tops of my onions? And there's been a
controversy
discussion about that. And I just wonder, is it a matter of how much you cut? Should you not cut at all? What does Arzeena say? I always say, let's ask Arzeena.
I should mention, I've never cut my onions. And we actually grow our onions, both the Walla Wallas and the storage, the red ones as well, in bundles of 3. We start them in, our flats are these, 128 flats. So in each cell, there's 3 seed. And when they are, large enough to transplant, we don't snip them. We just pull them out, transplant them as a clump, and they're growing as a clump in 3s. So right now, if you go out into the onion patch, and we grow a few thousand onions, none of them have been trimmed. I'm just trying to think like what the reasoning for trimming is. I do know some growers who trim their onions if they can't get to transplanting in a timely manner and the food is running out in the pot. You can trim your onions just to slow down the growth so that the roots, often when you trim onions, the roots will sort of slough off as well. So that can help with a bit of the transplant shock as well. But
I think that what's happening, Arzeena, is that people are thinking for one reason or another that it actually speeds the growth and they will ripen more quickly if you cut them. But your explanation about them actually, the bulb actually being a part of the leaf system, really made sense to me when you explained it that way, and that it actually slows down the ripening and the growth, it sounds like.
Yeah, like so that's a point that everyone on the call should know, that an onion, that part that you eat is actually not a root. The little hairs that are coming out at the bottom of the onion, that's the root. The part that you're eating is a swelling of the leaf. And so by extension, you need to have a good number of leaves to have all those layers within the onion. The leaf is what is capturing all of the solar energy and the sugars, and then it's pumping it into the bottom of that leaf that's formed that swelling of the onion. The onion swelling is actually not controlled by the leaves. It's controlled by day length. So in North America, we grow what are called long day onions. So they're triggered into bulbing by day length. So trimming doesn't really have an impact on it being a bulb. It's really the timing. That's why most people, you need to start your onions in around February so that they're a good size by the time they get triggered to bulb.
Okay,
so,
great.
Yeah.
What if you want to eat some green onions? Judy McKinley is asking.
Yeah, I mean, you can trim them and just have a little snip.
Yeah,
that's fine.
Don't give them a haircut, but just a little snip here and there.
A
question from Karen for you, Arzeena, about daikon radishes. When should we sow those daikon radishes?
Yes. Oh, thank you. That should have been listed, and I'm going to adjust that because I remember how many people love daikon. Daikon should be seeded in that first week of July with the other root vegetables. And keep in mind too, if you are growing root vegetables in the brassica family, to cover them, put rime as soon as you seed them, because there's those two issues: the imported cabbage worm that will eat up the greens, and then there's also cabbage maggot, the root maggot, and that's what you want to really prevent from getting into your daikon or your baby turnips or anything like that. So rime is your friend for a lot of your brassicas.
So you're saying as soon as you plant those seeds or seedlings in the ground, you want to cover them with rime, but not so much in the pots. You wouldn't be putting daikon in a pot, right? Gotcha.
So these are the root veggies. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
We have a question about. Oh, sorry.
No, just to that. When you are growing seedlings in pots in the summer, yes to rime over them as well.
Oh, okay.
I know, apologies, but as I'm talking to you, I'm looking out the window and I am seeing 3 cabbage butterflies, and it's just like driving me insane, knowing that they're going by scent, right? And they smell cabbage family, and the wafting in the wind of the leaves is what really triggers them. So those little seedlings can be really susceptible to being munched by cabbage worm. So.
Oh, I think we can all attest to the reality of that. Can you say a few words about kohlrabi?
Yes, so kohlrabi is, I think, coming up soon, but it's in the brassica family. There are some, probably 2 major types of kohlrabi. The smaller ones that are kind of golf ball or maybe not quite tennis ball size. Those tend to be around 60 days in maturity and can be grown quite quickly. If you are wanting the big super schmelts, like the giant kohlrabi, they are going to be planted in July, whereas the other ones can be often August planted. If I don't have it listed in here, I should. I'll just double check on that date.
And what about parsnips, Arzeena? I'm just fielding these fielding these questions for you.
Sadly, parsnips, April. They are one of the slowest growing root vegetables I have ever grown. I love parsnips, and my husband's family is from the UK, and parsnips at Christmas time is a must, but they are slow, and they need to be started way in the spring in order for you to get a good sized root. So
okay, that was a question for Whitney. Sorry, Whitney. And welcome, Whitney. Nice to see you again, by the way, with your beautiful baby Farley. Jill is asking, when do you harvest your carrots for winter storage, Arzeena?
Often it's going to be timed by the weather or what's going on. We'll try and push it as long as possible, but usually the first week of October, we know that our wireworm is starting to make its way up and the rains are coming. And so we don't want to make it hard for us to harvest the winter carrots. So we pull out the first week of October.
Okay, and I know that Janice and Gerald Amundsen here on Quadra Island, I think you know them, they have the goat farm. Janice talks about leaving her potatoes actually really well mulched. I don't know if it's all the way through winter, but pretty late into the winter, and just harvesting them as she needs them. Have you ever done that?
I haven't, because I'm afraid of that freeze-thaw cycle. And
oh yeah, you got it really cold.
You know what happens to potatoes when they get frozen, right? They get kind of mushy. Yeah. So we do try and pull as much as possible. Having said that, I always get volunteer potatoes, right? Coming up where we grew potatoes last year. So that tells me that especially the little small ones that are buried, that we've missed, have survived just fine and probably would have been edible. So I think the key to that is just knowing your weather and your microclimate. If you think you are mild enough that you can overwinter your potatoes, do that, mulch them really well. As Janice mentioned, freezing for potatoes is really not good. So a deep 6-inch straw on top of that potato area. And then, yeah, you can harvest as you need them. Your garden is then your cold storage. It's your root cellar. You don't have to be bringing everything inside like we do.
I love it.
Yeah.
Lynn has a question about mildew on her Russian kale. Do you have any suggestions on that?
Mildew is often, like a powdery mildew is often a sign of poor air circulation. So a couple ways to remedy that is to space your winter veggies a little bit farther apart. And I recommend that in general anyways, not to crowd them too much, because the low light, if they're growing in tunnels where you're not rolling up the side in the wintertime and there's not good airflow, it's very conducive to fungal diseases. So space your winter veggies slightly farther apart than you would have in the spring or summer. And the other hint is just to harvest them more often, so that as you're taking out leaves, that will enable a lot more airflow to happen. If it's still going on, milk is a really good spray for powdery mildew. Sorry, it's a dairy. If you're dairy intolerant, I'm going to have to go buy milk, but any kind of milk, 1%, 2%, dry milk, if you've got powdered, it's usually a 50-50 water to milk combination sprayed on the plant. And usually by 1 or 2 sprays, the mildew is under control. So, yeah.
Is it the lactic acid?
They don't know, actually. I think it's actually the phosphorus in the milk, but this was discovered in Brazil probably a couple of decades ago. And since then, it's a thing. Yeah.
It's a
specifically,
thing. It's fascinating. I've heard a lot of people talking about it, and a few people who gab with us on Gabbing About Gardening have mentioned using it as well. Judy McKinley is saying that her Clatonia has been fabulous and still growing.
Oh,
she's up in Haida Gwaii.
Awesome. I've just finished collecting my Claytonia seed. So ours went to seed, fairly early in our greenhouse, and I've been able to collect seed. And when I do collect seed, I know that I've missed probably a good 50% of the seed. So wherever Claytonia goes to seed, you're going to get a harvest next year. So probably my favorite overwintering veg. And I have photos for folks who don't know what I'm talking about. But that's a good segue for what you should be planting in mid to late July. So this is now, we're starting to get closer. I mean, it's hot. Think about the temperatures that are outside. So it's sometimes hard to be thinking about winter at this time of the year. But if you enjoy growing collards, or eating collards, I should say, they're slightly faster growing than regular kales. So they can get away with planting a little bit earlier. So this is when you start your collards. This is the daikon time as well. Daikon, especially if you're not growing, daikon has so many different varieties. Some of the smaller daikon you can push until mid to late July. If you planted it in early July, it's totally fine as well. Winter radish, has everyone heard of, so this is not the little round radishes I'm talking about. This is the radishes that I have in the photo. They're generally storage radishes. They're meaty. They're something you wouldn't be crunching raw. You grate them if you want to eat them raw, or slice them really thinly. They're black Spanish round is the one with the black skin, or what's called watermelon radish. It has a green outside and a pink flesh. So these are dense radishes. They are generally started mid to late July. Chinese cabbage for growing kimchi. If anyone's growing Chinese cabbage right now, I can promise you it's full of slugs and earwigs and aphids and all. Chinese cabbage is a magnet for bugs, especially in the spring months. But when you grow it in the fall, far fewer issues. So if you've given up growing Chinese cabbage, don't give up. Plant it later and have it mature in the fall months, because you will be so rewarded by your own kimchi and all the things you use Chinese cabbage for. Turnips and Claytonia are 2 other types that you can grow mid to late July. And I'm just going to wax on about Claytonia for a little bit, because as I mentioned, my favorite overwintering green, it is native to this part of the world, also called miner's lettuce. It grows naturally in the forests of, sort of on the edge of the forest in the Pacific Northwest. and chock full of minerals and vitamins. And once you let it go to seed, as I mentioned, you will get this blanket. It is literally the plant that keeps giving. I know greens are generally thought of annuals, but the fact that this self-seeds so well, I now have a perennial supply of Claytonia in my greenhouse that just makes for delicious eating all winter long.
Yeah, and it's just so beautiful. Oh, look at that.
This
That's
is
gorgeous.
Okay, so maybe a word of warning. I started with 12 Claytonia plants in the back corner of this greenhouse, and after 2 seasons, this is what my greenhouse looks like. Well, it looks
It's had its way with you, my dear.
It did. It loves our greenhouse.
You have been taken over. I love it. It's so delicious and tender.
Yes.
See, Arzeena. Oh, sorry.
No, it's just one green I don't mind bending on my knees to harvest. And
good.
you can interplant something low growing like Claytonia with a taller veg like chard or kale. Like,
that's gorgeous.
It makes
so pretty.
Yeah.
See, Arzeena, Evangeline has a question and a comment. She's reminding us that wasps versus cabbage moths is a good fight.
Mm-hmm. Definitely a reason. Keep wasp nests in your garden if you can. I know, I know that if they're biting or stinging, then you want to do some control. But if they're somewhere where they're not bothering you, watching a wasp pick up a cabbage moth caterpillar, I love it. It's so good.
Yes, it does your heart good when you're a gardener to watch those battles go on sometimes. And not have to be too involved, which is lovely. So yeah, that's a great reminder. Evangeline's also asking about the timing for planting arugula.
Okay, we're coming up to it, actually.
Oh, good. And one more thing to put in your thinking cap for a moment is Karen is asking about rutabaga and when to plant.
Okay. So rutabaga would have been with the turnip mid to late July. So sorry, turnips / rutabaga. I'll put that in. And my understanding is the turnips are the white flesh root veggies and the rutabagas have the yellow flesh. I think that's generally how I learned it, but they're very obviously related root vegetables. Yeah. Okay, so thanks for the arugula segue and why don't we plant arugula before, early August? Primarily the heat. A lot of these veggies want to be maturing as our nights are getting cooler. And that generally doesn't happen until August. So that's why we're waiting for the timing, why we don't plant bok choy in July. It just goes to seed really, really quickly. Whereas if you wait, it's incredible, just a few weeks later, if you plant these veggies in August, spinach, everybody's spinach is probably bolting right now, right? If you plant your spinach in August and your cilantro and all of those veggies that tend to bolt so quickly, the days are now shortening. The nights are getting cooler. We're getting a lot of dew. This is not the time that those plants understand that they should go to seed because they know winter is approaching. So you get way more luscious leaf growth by seeding them in August than you would in springtime or even now, especially. So August is the month for all your greens, like your salady type of greens, spinaches, your choys, and now some of your other Asian vegetables. So think of August as the month to start all your salad for winter, if that helps. And yeah, I don't want to forget the herbs. Dill, cilantro, chives. Again, they're cooler. Parsley, I should have put in there as well. These are the veggies that will keep you eating through the herbs through the winter time. And for those who, there's 3 kind of major types of choy. There's the larger bok choy, and in the baby bok choy, you have the green stem Shanghai types, and then the white stem, what are kind of called the baby toy choys. Out of these 3, the larger bok choys are actually one of the easier ones to grow. They they tend to grow, you know, quite quickly. Whereas the smaller ones, I find, I mean, they're great for if you've got small families, if it's just you and someone else, because there's not as much commitment. I'm finding as I'm selling bok choy right now, it's funny how much people are like, the big bok choy is too much commitment. I can't cook it all right at once, whereas the small ones tend to be more doable. The small ones are also, you can grow them in pots if you don't have space in your garden. They do well in, you know, 2 or 3 gallon pots, and that's something nice as well. So choose the type of choy according to how you know what you enjoy eating, and how you like using them. I also use bok choy instead of the Chinese cabbage in making kimchi. Just, you know, it's quite a lot easier to grow. And then we've got now the winter lettuces. You know what? Pretty much every lettuce can be grown right now. There are varieties like Winter Density on the bottom left that are known for their winter hardiness. The top left here is a butterhead called Continuity. But you can grow pretty much every lettuce. And the little baby Tom Thumb type butterheads as well are great. They're fast, so you'll be able to, from August, still get a mini head of butterhead before the frost. So think mostly they're loose leaf varieties that you're going to be growing right now that tend to be slightly thicker leaf, but if you've got protection, if you've got cover, pretty much every lettuce can be grown in August for fall harvest. So yeah. Let me know if folks have a question on the recommended varieties, but pretty much anything, especially if you've got leftover seed from the spring. You know, if you like that type of lettuce, grow it again in fall. Spinach, you know, we just talked about how quickly it bolts. Come fall, if you want to grow a really, really cold hardy spinach, you're going to want to grow the more crinkly, or what's called Savoy varieties. So this one variety, Bloomsdale Savoy, is probably the cold hardiest spinach you can grow. It's got quite a robust spinachy flavor. So just be aware that we are kind of used to kind of the babier flat leaf varieties that don't have a strong spinach flavor. So, but if you prefer those, then you're going to want to try a variety like Tai or Viraflay that aren't quite as savoyed or crinkly. But Bloomsdale is kind of the cold hardy standard in spinach. And then I mentioned Asian greens. You've eaten these if you've ever eaten a California salad mix from the supermarket, because they're always mixed into with the lettuces. So this is Mizuna. Tatsoi, which to me always looks like an African violet, a glossy African violet. It grows like a rosette. And then you get these purple frills. So again, whenever there's a chance to grow color, I like to add some of the purple mustards and the frilly ones into the garden. Just, it looks so much nicer when you can add a little burst of color in the garden. And as I mentioned, the fall herbs, cilantro, dill, chives, parsley. Don't forget those, because fall cilantro, eating fresh herbs, cilantro and dill especially, because that's also, I mean, there's time still to do canning of your tomatoes if you're making salsas or pickles. This is a good time to have some of those fresh herbs as well. I'm going to pause and just see if some of the questions. Do you still have to cover Mizuna? Oh yes, sadly. All of the Asian greens are generally brassicas. So you're going to want to cover them until about mid to late September, really when it starts to get much cooler. There's less egg laying, although I have seen a cabbage butterfly in December. There's not as much damage come the cooler months. So yes. Are Swedes the same as rutabaga? Yes, I believe they are. I can't remember. Any Brits on this call? I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah.
They are. We're coming up to the 5 o'clock hour. Do we want to extend it for a few more minutes, or
how are folks feeling? I'm fine to stay because we still have September and October, but I can.
Well, let's keep going. I just want to interject a word of appreciation to you, Arzeena, and to one of our major sponsors, and that is Joyce at Speedy Bin. Joyce has been very, very supportive of all of the Gabbing About Gardening initiatives, the radio show, our Gabbing Zoom calls. And I just want to do a shout out to her right now and tell her, first of all, thank you for her amazing compost bins. I'm just thrilled at the compost that I'm making using a variety, 3 different compost bins from Joyce at speedybin.com. So check that out. And also to Maple Magazine, a new sponsor. And Maple Magazine is a Canadian lifestyle magazine. And Gabbing About Gardening now has a column every issue. And I'm hoping that you will be featured in one of my upcoming articles, Arzeena. I want to do an interview with you about winter gardening. So keep that in mind. So let's go on, and whoever has to leave, thank you for joining Gabbing About Gardening. If you have to leave, we understand. Please remember that this is an event, this is a series of educational programs that are based entirely on your contributions and donations. So we're extremely grateful for everything that you contribute. And especially grateful to Arzeena for taking this time and putting together such a beautiful presentation. So on we go with you, Arzeena.
Sure.
Let's hear about cilantro.
Thanks. And yes, thanks to everybody. I can still see who are on the call. Appreciate. I know this is getting into some more time away from your garden, so much appreciated. So one word about cilantro. We talked about how difficult it is to grow in the spring, how it goes to seed so very quickly, and all the flowers are so beneficial in the garden. Bees love them. Predatory insects love cilantro flowers. It's, if you're looking for the leaf, the thing to put in your salsa, having it go to the seed is not always fun to look at. So I suggest for gardeners during the summer months, just to plant short rows every 2 weeks. And then come August, so again, this magical thing happens when the day lengths have shortened, that the cilantro that comes up in August, you will be eating all winter. So you can now plant a big long row and have it harvested whenever you like, because this is the time for cilantro to be in production. It's quite cold hardy. You wouldn't expect so, because so much of our cilantro comes to us from Mexico, but it will withstand frost and snow quite a lot. So yeah,
and
August is
the seed a lot more, Arzeena. I'm making sog with mustard and chard and spinach and kale, and using the seed from the cilantro, which is the same as coriander, is it not?
It is. So that's another reason to let some of it go to seed in the springtime, so you have that seed in the fall. And then I find when it self-seeds, you get a blanket of cilantro too. So, and who doesn't like that? It's fantastic.
Yvonne is asking if you have a specific cilantro type you'd like to recommend.
We grow 2 kinds. We grow Santo and Calypso. Generally, Santo has been around for quite a long time. Calypso is a new variety, which I think we're trialing this year. My understanding is Calypso has a bit of better flavor. It's got that more cilantro-y flavor. That has been specifically chosen by folks who are Latin American. They've helped the breeder to select a better variety, because Santo was they felt washed out flavors. So I'm excited about a new cilantro. Yeah. Moving on to September. So again, the weeks are getting shorter, but we still have time to plant a lot of those greens that were grown that are fast. So lettuce was in August, and you won't see much lettuce now, but you can still plant things like arugula. It is very fast, and again, won't go to seed the way it does in the springtime. Now is the time that you can start to grow radishes again, the little round crunchy radishes for your salads. And then someone was mentioning mash or corn salad. Now is the time when you seed corn salad. It doesn't like sprouting in hot soil. So that's why we wait until September for it to be seeded. And at least for this first half of September, you can continue to seed your lettuces. You won't get the full heads though. So if you like having a head of lettuce, August is the time to start. But if you don't mind having baby lettuce growing like a mesclun mix, you can keep going into the first half of September. And you can continue to plant Asian greens all to the first half of September. So I'm just going to point out for those who don't know arugula, it's a delicious green. It has this nutty flavor when it's grown in cool weather. It can get quite spicy and more like a horseradish if it's grown in heat, which is why often we stop growing in the summer months and then resume arugula in the fall. Much nuttier flavor when the weather is cooler. It will survive frost. It's one of those really hardy greens, again, that we don't attribute because often we are starting to import a lot of these greens, but in your garden, it will withstand snow. It's cold and fairly tough. So don't worry too much about it. If you can grow it under a low tunnel, great. And if not, it will grow outside uncovered quite well into November and a little bit past probably. And just a note about corn salad, maybe not a green that many people here in North America are familiar with, but it grows quite extensively in Europe, where it's kind of like a field weed, quote unquote weed, but it has this very fresh green flavor, not really strong. So if strong flavors like arugula or endive or the mustard greens are not to your liking, corn salad might be something that you want to try. I always think it looks like little baby petunia seedlings. So it's known for its mild flavor and again, likes that cooler soil. So you don't generally seed it until September. And then just a note about radishes. Again, most people know the red radish, but don't forget that it comes in a bunch of different colors. We love growing the pink radishes. There's the white icicle varieties as well. So, if you want to add a bit more color into your plate, as well as in the garden, then these are fun to grow and can be thrown in pretty much in between a number of different plants. They don't take up a lot of space. And they're generally 30 to 35 days before you get a nice crunchy radish.
And just to clarify, Arzeena, are these seeded and put out as transplants or are they all direct sown?
This is direct sown.
Okay, yes. So that was a question from Lynn. Thank you for asking that question, Lynn. Whitney has a lovely comment. She finds that corn salad tastes a bit like blueberry. I think you meant corn salad tastes like blueberry. Mm-hmm. I love corn salad. Yeah. It's so creamy in your mouth. It has such a beautiful texture.
Yes, it does have a nice bite to it. That's for sure. Yeah. This is going to be the last sort of crop that I'm going to talk about for winter gardening, but I would be remiss if I didn't talk about garlic, because part of winter gardening, you need to remember to plant your garlic. And don't forget, because come next spring, you'll be kicking yourself. And this is the time of the year when seed is most available. So if you're a garlic lover and aficionado, you're going to be actually sourcing your seed probably from between August and September. It sells out so quickly. I can't believe it. The more farmers that I know who are growing garlic, we're all finding that we're selling out more and more quickly. And I don't know if that's just people who have switched from supermarket garlic to local garlic. The flavor is so much better when you grow your own. So yeah, this is a photo of a favorite variety of mine called Susan Delafield. It's a white porcelain garlic. And so know that there are a number of different kinds of garlic, but October is generally the month when you want to be planting. There are 3 types. There's a hardneck, which is the one in the photo that's got that stem that's hard, that's comes out. Generally, supermarket garlic is a soft neck. It doesn't have that stem. Soft necks tend to store better, which is why the supermarkets like it. But it generally, I mean, I think flavor wise, I have yet to find a soft neck that competes with a hard neck for flavor. And then there is elephant garlic. Yeah, go ahead.
Arzeena, I love your garlic. I planted your garlic last year. It's doing really well. But some of my own garlic started sprouting. And so I planted a bunch in March. And of course, it's about half the size of what I planted in the fall. But how do you harvest garlic that you plant in the spring? Do you harvest it in a similar way at the same time?
Not the same time. It will be a later timing. And so there's a few things that you need to watch for in garlic that tells you when it's ready. So for the hard necks, what I use is we always we always miss taking off scapes. So right now is when a garlic scapes, the flowers are coming up, they're twirling. So we're, breaking those off. We generally miss a few per variety. And when they curl, and then as the garlic matures, they uncurl and then they stand straight up, kind of like a leek flower. When they're standing up, the garlic is ready. So that's generally the indication that I use. Now, if you were really diligent and you took off all your scapes and you forgot, or you're not sure, the other way to look at garlic and to see its maturity is when the bottom 4 leaves have turned fully brown and are wrinkled up. So when those 4 are done, it's time to pull the garlic. So you look at the physiology of the garlic and that tells you the timing of when to pull. So March planted is probably going to be a few weeks later than your fall planted.
Okay,
so
and the scape is really your...
If you can leave a scape.
Yeah. So, and do all varieties of garlic, hardneck and softneck, have scapes?
No. So the softnecks... The softnecks do not. So good question. So for them, you are just going to look at the 4 bottom leaves. And I should say softnecks are usually a good 2 weeks earlier maturing than hardnecks. So they will probably be pulled first. So if you are growing a softneck, just watch, where it's at, because the timing, where are we at, mid-June? It's probably going to be in a couple of weeks that it's going to be ready to pull. So that's exciting.
Okay, and I just want to make sure I gave the right answer. I think Lynn asked if the Mizuna and the herbs were all direct seeded.
Yeah.
And I assumed yes. I hope right. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, for those now that it's starting to get cooler in the garden and there's more moisture, you can direct seed it. Yes, and especially because for cilantro, dill, you want quite a lot. And transplant, I've never found transplanting either dill or cilantro to work super well. I think belonging to the carrot family, they like to be direct seeded. So thanks for that point. I'll have to remember to point that out when people are asking what to do for those. And for Mizuna, again, we grow a lot. So we don't, when you're growing like hundreds and hundreds of feet, you don't want to be transplanting. You could, but if there wasn't room in your garden, you could start them in trays and then transplant. But you can direct seed the Mizuna too. So good question. So that was just so folks know like how to pick your garlics. Hardneck I generally do for flavor and for storage. And by storage, I mean, if you want to be eating garlic now, like this month in June, you are going to be wanting to choose a soft neck because they will still be not sprouting in your pantry. They're known for their storage. They generally have smaller bulbs and they store a lot longer than the hardnecks do. So having a combination of both is kind of nice if you like not having to buy garlic. So I'm going to stop there because I think we've probably covered the majority of the veggies that are good for the garden. And I'm just going to, I see a lot of questions still up. Sorry, I haven't opened up the chat for a bit.
Actually,
we're
we're actually pretty much on track here, Arzeena. I've been jumping in and asking. I did have a comment from Karen saying that her arugula had been growing all year, including through the February snow, and that her current plants are from last spring. So she was delighted about that. Just a lot of thank you and appreciation going on. Wonderful information. I have 2 bulbs of Delafield left.
Oh, right on.
Somebody says, that's so great. Do you see any I've missed, Arzeena?
No, I think that's probably
it. Whitney saying her hardnecks are still holding strong from last year. Well, that's great. Actually, maybe that's a good segue to telling us how you store your garlic, Arzeena.
Well, obviously not as good as someone who's still got hardnecks right now. I want to know.
Maybe we should be asking
whoever's
Whitney.
Storing that, Whitney. Oh my gosh, amazing. So here's just one thing that I know about storage of garlic. They don't like to be in a cooler, like in a fridge. You want to have low humidity, and fridges are generally kind of wet for them. But the other reason you don't want to put them in a cooler is that cold temperatures mimic the winter outside. So when they go from being cold and then they're brought into warm, like beside in your kitchen where it's warm, they think they've gone through winter, and then they start to sprout. Whereas if you kept them at room temperature, I think at an even temperature without the fluctuating cold at night, warm at day, that can often prevent them from sprouting the way that garlic kind of does. I can't say I'm super successful at that because I've been eating frozen garlic for the last few weeks. My garlic does sprout, so I'd love to know whoever still has hardneck right now.
That's Whitney, actually, our buddy Whitney. Whitney, if you want to unmute and tell us what you're doing, that would be great. There you are, my dear. Wonderful.
My garlic's just been in burlap in my house and I keep the smallest bulbs, and it's still holding strong. Yeah.
Beautiful. So you'll plant your own garlic next year, or this fall, I should say.
And then I just wanted to say one thing about the potatoes, because this is a phenomenon I just discovered when I had potatoes the other night, was I ate potatoes from the garden and there was still a lot from last season that hadn't been harvested. So the new potatoes are like normal. The old potatoes, the skin was kind of hard and I peeled them, but the texture is like a water chestnut. Like it's super weird. They must hold water to support the plant through the season. Like the texture was just totally bizarre. It's like like a water.
Well, that makes sense, because probably what happens in potatoes for storage, they're storing a lot of their energy as starch so that they can overwinter. But when it's time for them to grow, most plants, what they do is they convert the starches into ready sugars so that the sugar is more available to the plant to move up and down. So it's probably sweeter, not as starchy. That kind of, it makes sense that it might taste like a water chestnut kind of thing. So interesting.
Yeah, very interesting. Arzeena, we have a question from Susan Wilson asking about Jerusalem artichoke seed and when it should be planted. I think those are from tubers, aren't they? Jerusalem artichoke?
Are, yeah. So they're kind of like in the potato family. So I generally harvest my Jerusalem artichokes in the fall when the plants have all died back, so that as much energy as possible has gone into making those tubers. So what I find is when I'm harvesting, I don't like wireworm doesn't really impact Jerusalem artichoke. So I leave the tubers in the soil as long as I can. And I found like up until maybe even April, I have found that they don't start sprouting yet. So you can probably find, but past now, like past April, it might be a bit late in finding tubers. You might be able to find someone whose garden is like, because looking at the Jerusalem artichoke in the garden right now, it's about almost knee height right now. But generally when you're growing Jerusalem artichoke, there's way more than you can use. So you might be able to find a gardener who will lift a few of those plants out and let you transplant them in the garden. I've never transplanted them myself at that time, but they're pretty tough plants and can withstand quite a lot.
Careful where you put them, I understand. A lot of people keep them in containers. I know Whitney's growing an amazing container full of Jerusalem artichoke. So you can plant them pretty much anytime, it sounds like, and then you harvest them the following year.
Yeah. But if you're if you're trying to find a specific variety, like a tuber, that's either purple or whatever variety, between November and April is generally the time when the tubers are available.
And I'm not sure who goes by SLINF, SLINF, but they're saying that they have tons. Please take some. So you guys can connect on that level. Jennifer Bankstall is reminding us that by keeping garlic in the dark, that will prevent sprouting.
Yeah.
Again, lots and lots of gratitude. And a question from Barbara, and I think all of us want to know about visiting your farm and purchasing your amazing veggies. You have a farm stand. Tell us the deal on getting down to see your farm stand and buying some of your veggies.
Sure. Well, probably the easiest place and where you'll have the most variety is at the Saturday Comox Valley Farmers Market, which is currently at the exhibition grounds in Courtenay. I'm there along with like a good 60 other farmers. So come and say hi. I'm usually the one at the stand. So you'll always find me there. I have friends and staff, either my kids or my own staff who come and help. So happy to chat as well. Because chatting is part of the farmers market. I love it. We also have a farm stand at the farm on Tuesdays and Fridays. If you're looking for something in particular that you want to pre-order, you can pick up at our farm stand, and the pre-order can be done off of our website, which is amarfarm.ca, AMARA farm. And then in terms of like my being at the farm, I think, Lou, when you introduced me, there was a bit of a list of things that I was involved in, which kind of takes me off the farm a lot, which is why I'm so grateful of my staff. But come berry season, which is mid-July, I am like the berry picker and berry person. So you can always find me in the berry patch come mid-July. Just stop by, say hi. Usually between Monday and Friday, I'm there if I'm not at a regional district meeting, which are more rare in the summer months. But right now I'm kind of off of the farm. But actually, good point is I would love for folks, if they want to keep in touch, to friend me on Facebook. I will also put my my cell number in, and I know people are like, oh my God, but quite frankly, I know only a few of you will ever text me and ask me questions. So this is my cell number, or you can text me on Messenger on Facebook and ask me gardening questions. I love nothing more than answering gardening questions.
And you're also a regular gabber on our radio show. We've started a Let's Ask Arzeena segment on the Gabbing About Gardening radio show every Tuesday. And depending on your availability, I'll be calling that number quite a lot, I can tell you.
No problem.
And get you on the radio show, Arzeena.
Yeah.
Sue Linford is offering Jerusalem artichoke. Where do you live, Sue? I think there's some people who might want to take you up on that. If you can let us know before we wrap things up here. Well, Arzeena, supreme gratitude as ever and always. You're just such a delight, so generous with your information. I just love the way you're so willing to share what you know with others. And karmically, you must really have big, wonderful karma. So thank you. Thank you for being with us. Why don't we give you the parting word on moving forward as we start to plan and plant our gardens. And then we'll all say bye-bye next Tuesday. Same time, same place. Gabbing About Gardening is featuring master herbalist Brigitte Mars from Boulder, Colorado. And she's talking about getting off your grass. And Brigitte teaches us how to turn our lawns into basically wild food gardens where you can just go outside and eat the weeds. In fact, that's the name of her best-selling book from, I think it's Chelsea Green, called Eat the Weeds, and that's Brigitte Mars. Next Tuesday, Monday, 3:30 here on Gabbing About Gardening. Over to you, Arzeena. What are your parting words of wisdom for us today?
Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you. Everyone was so great with their questions. I really, really enjoyed talking to you all today via Zoom. I know it's a little bit harder than being in person, but it allows us to connect from distances, which is kind of nice. And I just want to mention that, if this was overwhelming, I know there was a lot I presented. I hope you just try one new thing. That's for me, what keeps me excited about gardening is just trying new things and challenging myself to try and experiment. A lot of what I've learned is through trial and error. Don't be afraid to make those errors, because those are all the learning opportunities that we all get. And I think I look at them as moments of grace, that you were just like, oh, okay, I learned that lesson. So take some risks, but remember to just enjoy and have fun. Gardening is so much pleasure. And I thank you for your time and sharing your own pleasures with me too.
Oh, beautiful. That felt like a beautiful blessing. Moments of grace in the garden. Thank you, Arzeena Hamir. Thank you to all of you for joining us. It's wonderful to see you all again. We'll see you next week, same time, same place. Now go outside and get dirty. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Lovely to see you.
Talk again, Lou.
Very soon. Thank you, Arzeena.